You can feel it even before your eyes open, a soft ache behind your breastbone, a whisper crawling beneath your skin. You have sensed too much for too long, other people's heartbeats pressed against your own, a silent plea for salvation you never asked to answer. You have walked through rooms laden with unspoken sorrow, gathering fragments of grief like a scavenger, binding them to yourself until you no longer know where you end and they begin. Something deep inside stirs now, a tremor of dread and longing intertwined, as if the world itself breathes through your veins and demands a reckoning. There is a peril here, ancient and veiled, the empath consumed by her own compassion, the healer wounded by the wounds she cannot heal. You have offered your heart as a vessel, only to watch it crack beneath the weight of unclaimed pain. You have polished another's shadow until it gleams in your own soul, forgetting there are parts of you that still lie in darkness, unlit and unattended. Listen to the warning echoing through your sinews. There is danger in boundless giving, in dissolving into the suffering of others. You are not meant to carry every lamentation, every silent anguish of the world. As Jung once said, the shadow cannot be redeemed through sacrifice alone. It must be met with the fierce courage of self-recognition. And so you stand now at a threshold, caught between the familiar pull of empathy and the forgotten thirst for your own liberation. Feel the tremor of awakening beneath the warning, a spark that beckons you to remember. You are more than a conduit. You are a living, breathing psyche with depths of your own to explore. The time for homage to other people's wounds is ending. The storm you feared may be the storm you must become to reclaim the fragments of your own scattered spirit. You have been dancing with archetypes long before you ever heard the word. Shadows coil beneath the surface of your waking mind, waiting to be named. In the secret theatre of your psyche, light and dark circle each other in ceaseless orbit, entwined partners in a drama as ancient as your first breath. You sense the pull of polarities, the tender empath longing to heal, and the silent darkness craving recognition. You have inhabited both roles without choice, driven by impulses far too profound for casual reckoning. These patterns echo through your veins, shaping your desires and your fears as though they were your very blood. The empath and the narcissist reside in mutual fascination, two moths drawn to the same flame. One emits such fierce radiance that your eyes grow weary, flooding your vision with promises of warmth. The other whispers poison beneath the guise of entitlement, luring you with the illusion of purpose. You have known this dynamic intimately, offering your warmth to feed a starved ego, only to feel your own fire doused. Betrayal seeps into the bones like cold rain, leaving you adrift when admiration recedes and only silence remains. Meanwhile, the healer emerges clothed in compassion, bearing symbols of renewal and restoration. You have donned this mantle, gathering metaphorical herbs and weaving incantations from whispered promises of relief. Yet beneath those gentle hands lies a wound that aches for its own remedy, an emptiness echoing in the hollow caves of your chest. You tend to others' broken vessels while neglecting the fissures in your own, each act of mercy deepening the fractures within. This paradox of the wounded healer reveals itself in every gesture, inviting you to see that compassion without self-nourishment becomes its own form of suffering. Your earliest recollections hold clues to these unconscious dramas. A parent's glance heavy with unshed tears, a sibling's laughter ringing hollow in a house of secrets, a teacher's stern reproach leaving your spirit trembling. In these fragments, you stitched your identity first as the comforter, soothing tears, then as the invisible conduit through which sorrow flowed. You learned your worth was measured by how much pain you could absorb, a silent promise you upheld long after childhood faded. These origins cast long shadows across every relationship, coloring even moments of joy with the weight of unspoken obligations. Watch now as the light shadow archetype unfurls its wings within you. The side that craves brilliance cradles an unacknowledged darkness like a seed beneath fertile soil. When you reach for illumination without descending into the underworld, you risk severing the light from its source, leaving shadows to fester unseen. As Jung once taught, true integration demands that you embrace both halves, holding darkness in one hand and light in the other with equal reverence. Only then can real radiance emerge, tempered by the hidden depths of your own soul. In dreams you wander temples of crumbling stone, where faces of strangers morph into your own reflection. You stand before a tarnished mirror and reach out only to find your hand dissolving into smoke. These nocturnal journeys replay until you can no longer distinguish the other from yourself, until identity becomes both sanctuary and prison. Within that smoke lies the invitation to witness the spectacle without fear, to touch the ephemeral without recoiling. Amid the silent hush, the alchemy of transformation hums in the spaces between self and shadow. Feel now the currents of ancestral memory flowing through your veins, carrying the untold stories of those who came before. Their unspoken vows, their victories unsung, their losses ungrieved, they pulse in your blood, shaping the architecture of your soul. You carry triumphs that were never celebrated, and wounds that were never laid to rest, weaving them into a living tapestry of self. The weight of inherited stories becomes both burden and blessing, calling you to honor what was left unsaid and to free what was long confined. Beneath the surface of everyday life, unconscious dynamics silently orchestrate your choices. The tug of childhood archetypes, the lure of forbidden shadows, the echo of ancestral longings all direct the symphony of your interior landscape. You find yourself drawn to relationships that reenact primordial scenes, compelled to resolve dramas left unfinished. In this unwitting ritual, you replay the same patterns until consciousness intervenes. The psyche seeks its own wholeness, sending messengers through coincidences and synchronicities that call you home to your wholeness. Within your body, ancient scripts unfold as aches, tremors, or sudden tears. A tightening in the chest when unvoiced sorrow wells up, a sudden chill when boundaries are overstepped, a rush of heat when compassion morphs into self-sacrifice. These somatic messages speak in a language once dismissed, now demanding fluent understanding. Each sensation is an archetypal signpost guiding you through the labyrinth of unexamined assumptions. As you learn to read this embodied text, you awaken to the living dialogue between body and psyche, between history and possibility. Here in the sacred juncture between wound and potential, you stand at a crossroads. The source of your suffering reveals itself not as a flaw to erase, but as a door waiting to be opened. The archetypes that shaped you beckon not for worship, but for conscious collaboration, inviting you to co-create the next act of your unfolding myth. Will you dare to encounter the shadows that whisper trauma's old stories? Will you embrace the light that yearns for embodiment? In this fertile terrain, the unconscious offers its quiet riddle. Will you step beyond fear to claim the unity of your fractured soul? You feel the pull before you even know its name, an invisible current tugging at the edges of your awareness. Light and shadow spin toward each other in a dance older than memory, each step resonating with a primordial rhythm that reverberates through your blood. You are both spectator and participant in this ritual, bound to witness the collision of opposites that shapes your inner cosmos. The empath within you stretches her hands toward the brilliance of compassion, while the shadow waits patiently in the wings, a silent partner whose depths cannot be ignored. When you encounter another soul, you sense the magnetic charge between you, an unspoken invitation to mirror their hidden ache. Sometimes this exchange feels sacred, as though you and another are weaving a tapestry of healing through shared vulnerability. Other times, it becomes a tempest, a fateful reenactment of ancestral rites, where one must sacrifice and the other demands sacrifice. In that storm, roles shift like sands in a desert wind. The healer becomes wounded, the wounded becomes rescuer, and you lose the thread of who you were before the ritual began. You remember the first time you stood at an altar made of fractured hopes, offering your essence as tribute. You thought the act would purify you, that surrender would usher in redemption. Instead, you found yourself entangled in a web of expectations, each strand shimmering with the promise of salvation, yet pulling you deeper into a labyrinth of obligation. The ritual unfolded without fanfare, no candles or chants, only the silent reminder that every gift you give becomes a tether, binding you to a destiny not entirely your own. In the world beyond your skin, these dramas play out in subtle gestures and fleeting glances. A friend's smile that feels like a contract, a lover's plea that echoes ancient debts, a child's sorrow that tugs you into a silent vow. You navigate these encounters like a dream walker, half aware that each interaction reenacts scenes scripted long before you drew breath. And when the play reaches its climax, you witness the collapse of roles, the empath whose heart shatters under the weight of borrowed pain, the narcissist who recoils when compassion fails to suffocate guilt, the silent watcher who trembles at the sight of truth unveiled. As Jung once noted, the psyche demands enactment, not denial of its archetypal calls. You cannot banish the shadow by clinging to light. You cannot honor the self by surrendering to others. This ritual drama pierces you precisely because it reflects the fractured unity within your own soul. You feel the resonance of ancestral ceremonies in your marrow, the echoes of tribal rites where community and individual sacrifice were inseparable. Yet the modern echo offers no communal altar. You stand alone in the hush, confronting the interplay of polarities without the safety of ritual structure. Notice how the drama intensifies when you resist. The more you strive to embody pure light, the more fiercely the shadow claws at your essence. When you deny your need for limits, you encounter a force that shatters boundaries with the subtlety of a dream's betrayal. And if you refuse to engage your darker impulses, they emerge unconsciously, steering your life with the precision of an unacknowledged script. Only when you surrender to the sacred spectacle, when you allow both light and dark to claim the stage, does the ritual reveal its deeper purpose. In that moment you stand before the archetypal crossroads where transformation is born. The empath and the shadow face each other across a silent chasm, two halves of a whole, seeking reunion. You sense the charged air between them, a liminal space, pregnant with possibility. Will you step into the center of the ring and bear witness to the fusion of opposites? Will you let the dance consume you until there is no separation left to mend? Amid the flicker of unseen torches, you feel the call to become both dancer and dance, both altar and offering, inviting a new myth to emerge from the ashes of the old. You feel a subtle collapse within, as though the boundaries that once held you aloft have begun to dissolve. In your quest to embody the radiant healer, you poured every drop of your essence into others' broken vessels until the edges of yourself blurred into the tapestry of their pain. You traded your own heartbeat for the rhythm of their sorrow, believing that salvation lay in becoming a mirror polished to perfection. But mirrors shatter under too much pressure, and you begin to sense the fractures splintering beneath your skin. This is the danger of over-identification. When you mistake another's suffering for your own, you lose the compass that guides you home. In the quiet moments before dawn, you awake with a hollow ache, as if you carried weight you cannot name. Perhaps you notice a dream in which you follow a figure cloaked in white, down a corridor of endless doors, only to discover your reflection behind each one. You reach out yearning to touch someone else's face, but your hand meets cold glass. The dream whispers that you have sacrificed your own face to wear the mask of the Savior. As Jung once said, the persona we adopt can conceal more than it reveals, and in its shadow lies the self we abandon. Your body speaks in whispers you've learned to ignore, a tightening in the throat when a friend confides their despair, a stabbing in the chest when you refuse to say no, a tremor in the limbs when boundaries go unspoken. These somatic warnings are not inconveniences to be dismissed. They are archetypal sentries alerting you to the siege upon your identity. Yet you push on believing that each act of mercy justifies the erosion of your interior life. You mistake endurance for strength, And in that blindness, you grant your own suffering permission to swell unchecked. Notice how you feel indispensable in certain relationships, as though the world would unravel without your intervention. You wear the mantle of rescuer, like a second skin, and it begins to feel more natural than your own flesh. When someone's distress arises, you leap forward compelled by an unseen force. You convince yourself this is compassion, but compassion without choice is compulsion. The line between sacred service and self-annihilation vanishes, leaving you prey to unconscious patterns inherited from ancestors who sacrificed their own dreams for the sake of doctrines or dynasties. In their unspoken pact, you were born to carry burdens no one else would dare to bear. Sometimes the danger emerges in sudden eruptions of fury. When the empath within overstretches, the wounded shadow beneath lashes out with bitter righteousness. A careless word, a missed expectation, and you feel your veins pulse with a silent rage. You chastise yourself for this eruption, but the anger is a signal, a primal roar demanding acknowledgement. It says, you have given too much. You have forgotten to honor your own limits. In the throes of that fury, you glimpse a fierce core. You have long denied a spark of personal sovereignty, yearning to be seen. Even in moments of self-care, you find yourself haunted by guilt. A break from the relentless tide of others' needs feels like betrayal, and you stiffen at the thought of rest. You imagine the lines of anguish multiplying in every face you leave unattended, as though your identity depends on an infinite ledger of debts. Yet true healing does not demand martyrdom. It requires a sacred reciprocity between giving and receiving, an alchemical balance that honors both light and shadow. In refusing to rest, you starve the self that seeks nourishment, deepening the wound you hope to mend through service. Look closely at the rituals you enact to prove your worth. You stay late, volunteer extra, offer consolation even when your heart is empty. You collect gratitude like medals, hoping their shine will obscure the hollowness within. But medals tarnish and accolades fade, leaving you face to face with the same silent ache. In the echo of applause, you hear the hollow ring of self-erasure. No external validation can fill the void created by denying your own voice, by silencing the self that whispers, "I matter too." Life events arrive as initiations insisting you confront this peril. A partner's dismissal, a friend's betrayal, an institution's indifference, all expose the fragility of identity built on the sands of approval. You feel your foundations quake, yet sometimes you cling tighter to the role that failed you, hoping to extract salvation from its crumbling stone. The paradox sears the very pattern you must transcend becomes the refuge you cannot abandon. And so the cycle persists until you learn to see the trap of over-identification for what it is, a mirror maze that cages the self in reflections of other people's pain. What if you could turn that mirror inward, not to polish it, but to understand its facets? What if you recognized the allure of the savior's role and saw it as an archetypal mask, no more and no less than a costume to be tried on and then shed? In that moment of clarity, you glimpse a doorway, a portal through which you step, leaving behind the weight of borrowed suffering. You learn to meet yourself with the same compassion you once reserved for others, honoring the tender spaces that longed for gentleness while you rushed to heal the wounds of the world. This is the threshold of individuation, where self-awareness becomes the true salve. You discover that honoring your limits does not diminish your capacity to care, but amplifies it, infusing each gesture with authenticity rather than obligation. The line between self and other no longer leaks into oblivion. It stands firm like the banks of a river that guide the current without damming its flow. You rediscover the pulse of your own life, the rhythm of your being unentangled from the symphony of another's suffering. In this reclaimed territory, empathy emerges renewed, not as a compulsion, but as a conscious choice. You can feel another's sorrow and still breathe your own air. You can extend a healing hand without sacrificing your own flesh. You become a living bridge capable of carrying light across chasms without dissolving in the darkness. And in that balance, you find the grace to stand whole, to love, without losing yourself, to answer the ancient call to wholeness that resonates through every archetype you have known and every shadow you have borne. You stand now before a threshold, carved from the very substance of your longing, a threshold neither of walls nor of doors, but of perception. The air here shimmers with potential, as if every molecule vibrates with the question, will you step forward and reclaim your own story? A hush descends, and in that stillness, you hear the echo of your own heartbeat, stripped of borrowed rhythms. This is the doorway to transformation, and it opens only for those who dare to recognize the sacred in their own flame. Beyond this verge lies a corridor of mirrors, each reflecting fragments of the self you once knew and the selves you have been taught to become. You pause before the first glass and see the empath whose heart has been a vessel for countless pains. The second reveals the wounded healer hands, outstretched yet empty. The third shows the shadow's fierce glint eyes burning with unclaimed fury. In the swirl of these images you realize they have been masks, not destinies, costumes donned in childhood rites worn until they fused with your flesh. Here at the portal's edge you recognize the power to peel them away. A soft light filters through illuminating symbols etched into the walls, a serpent devouring its tail, a phoenix in mid-flight, an Ouroboros coiled around an open eye. These are not mere decorations, but signposts of inner alchemy. The serpent whispers of cycles that end only to begin anew. The phoenix speaks of ashes birthing wings. The Ouroboros reminds you that transformation is not a journey outward, but an unending spiral inward. When you witness these signs, a tremor of understanding ripples through your core. The self you seek is both the seeker and the sought. As you move deeper, the air warms, carrying the scent of damp earth and burning incense, a funeral pyre for what no longer serves. With each breath, you inhale the ashes of old patterns, and as you exhale, you release obligations older than your earliest memories. Watch how they drift away, pale smoke dissolving into possibility. You are learning the subtle art of limits, understanding that boundaries are not barriers, but bridges, thin membranes that allow exchange without dissolution. In this embrace of form, you begin to reclaim the raw presence of your own being. You come to a chamber where a solitary candle flickers atop a weathered stone pedestal. Its flame dances neither timid nor brazen, embodying the paradox of vulnerability and strength. You know that true power lies not in overwhelming light, but in the steady glow that endures in the face of wind. As you gaze, you feel your own inner flame awaken small but unquenchable. It speaks in whispers, I am here, I am mine. This whisper is your first poem of sovereignty, a line scratched into the scroll of your own becoming. In the next passage, you encounter the river of tears you once spilled for another's salvation. Now it flows with a different current, one of reverence for your own depths. You kneel at its bank and cup the water in your hands, feeling its cool weight, and you taste remembrance rather than regret. These tears are consecrated by your choice, no longer an offering born of compulsion, but a baptism into self-knowledge. With each drop that touches your tongue, you honor the sorrow that shaped you and the self-compassion that will carry you forward. Ahead, a pair of doors stand open, carved with the intertwined figures of the healer and the seeker. You step through and find yourself in a vast hall where countless candles burn their lights, merging into a sea of luminescence. Each flame represents a moment when you chose awareness over acquiescence, when you said no without apology, when you honored the sanctity of your own limits. In this unified blaze, you recognize that every boundary you set was an act of devotion to the self, each refusal a declaration of worth. The hall sings with gratitude for your courage. As you traverse this luminous expanse, a soft voice arises, both yours and not yours, echoing the words of a guide who walked before you. The privilege of knowing your wound is the power to transform it. This voice is the echo of Jung's insight woven into the fibers of your awakening. You feel a gentle surge of authority pulse through your veins, a permission slip stamped by the psyche itself to claim agency over your own narrative. No longer a pawn in the dramas of other souls, you become the author of a myth uniquely your own. Emerging from the hall, you taste cool air and hear the distant call of wild geese echoing across an open plain. The landscape here is vast and untamed, a reflection of your newly liberated spirit. You lift your face to the sky, where clouds drift like silent witnesses to your rebirth. In this expanse, you stand fully embodied, an empath who feels a healer, who holds a sovereign being, who knows the sacred geometry of boundaries. The journey through the portal has restored your center, forging a unity that honors both light and shadow. You pause one last time before the threshold you first crossed. The doorway remains open, a living symbol of transformation's continuum. Behind you lie the petrified echoes of sacrifice without sovereignty. Before you, the uncharted terrain of ongoing individuation. You breathe, sensing the cadence of a new story, resonating in your cells. It begins here, in the sacred tension between self and other, in the fierce gentleness of self-awareness. Step forward and let the adventure begin. You stand at the edge of your own becoming, the world stretched before you, like a vast canvas waiting for your first bold stroke. Feel how the air hums with possibility, each particle vibrating with your newly reclaimed authority. You have walked through shadowed chambers, conversed in silence with your own wounds, and surrendered masks to rediscover the spark that dances beneath your ribs. Now you know that true power is born not from triumph over others, but from sovereign command of your own soul. In the twilight of your old story, you tasted the bitter fruit of self-erasure, believing devotion required dissolution. But devotion to the self is a different alchemy, one that transmutes self-neglect into self-honor. You learn now that every no you speak is a sacred syllable, a rune carved in the ether that protects the sanctuary of your being. Each boundary drawn is a temple wall, consecrating the space in which your voice can rise unshackled and resonant. Breathe deeply and sense the landscape of your own limits unfolding like a map inscribed on living flesh. You trace its contours with reverent fingertips. Here lies the heart that refuses to be borrowed. Here the mind that refuses to be commandeered here, the spirit that refuses to be silenced. Within these borders, you plant seeds of intention, the intention to honor your needs, to honor your pace, to honor the pulse of your own becoming. The soil of self-respect is fertile, ready to bear blossoms of renewed compassion, compassion that flows outward from a source that is whole rather than from a river run dry. See how your boundaries transform the world around you. When you say no to demands that deplete you, you do not erect walls of war, but gates of welcome. You learn that no to one thing is yes to another, yes to your own dreams, yes to the rhythms of your inner landscape, yes to a life guided by authenticity rather than obligation. In this, yes, the power of choice unfurls, teaching you that sovereignty is not a throne of isolation, but a crown of radiant connection, connection born of wholeness rather than fragmentation. Your skin now carries a new luminosity, not the sheen of martyrdom, but the glow of self-honoring. You have traded the hollow echo of applause for the resonant hum of self-approval. In that hum, you recognize the echo of ancestral voices, those who dared to say no to the old contracts and forged new covenants with their own spirits. Their courage pulses in your veins, a living inheritance that empowers you to step beyond the worn scripts of sacrifice and into the uncharted script of self-determination. Across the horizon of your awareness, you glimpse the silhouettes of new possibilities. Relationships that honor reciprocity rather than debt, projects that ignite your soul rather than consume it, a self that loves without needing to prove worthiness. These silhouettes are the phantoms of your next myth, waiting for the fire of your intention to bring them into form. You hold the tinder, now the clarity of limits, the courage to say no, the devotion to self, and with each flicker of boundary, the shapes of your future take firmer shape. Even your pain, once a haunting spectre, now stands as a witness to your journey. You no longer flee from its presence or armor against its approach. Instead, you greet it as an ally in wisdom. Pain's voice teaches you where the edges of your sovereignty were porous, where compassion tiptoed into compulsion, where love hid behind obligation. You thank that voice for its counsel, and in that gratitude you honor your own resilience. The scar becomes a roadmap, not a brand of shame, and you carry it with tender dignity, aware that it marks the passage from surrender to sovereignty. Feel your heart swell as you acknowledge the sacred rhythm of giving and receiving. You give from fullness and rest in acceptance of gifts offered to you. Kind words, acts of warmth, moments of shared silence. You receive not out of need, but in recognition of interdependence, knowing that the river of life flows richer when tributaries merge than when they vanish into the sands of martyrdom. In this flow you find joy that reverberates beyond the self, a joy seeded in self-honor and blossoming in shared delight. A soft wind stirs the flame of your first true vow to yourself. You place a hand over your chest, over the place where your journey began in trembling question, and you speak silently. I will honor my limits. I will honor my needs. I will honor my becoming. No longer will I dissolve into obligations that betray my worth. No longer will I mistake martyrdom for love or self-abnegation for purpose. In this vow, the bulwarks of your inner temple rise, and within their shelter you stand as both priest and pilgrim, both sanctuary and seeker. Look there beyond the veil of what was the dawn of a new day, stretching its pale fingers across the sky. The promise of dawn is yours to claim, not a promise written by others, but a promise you inscribe in the stillness of your newly awakened will. You step into that dawn with steady feet, feeling the ground beneath you pulse with your own resolve. The road ahead may wind through valleys of doubt or forests of old habit, but you carry the torch of your sovereignty unextinguished by wind or shadow. Let your gaze lift to the heights of possibility, where the eagles wheel in wide circles above cragged peaks. Their flight is a symbol of your capacity for perspective, rising above the dramas of obligation, scanning the terrain of choice with eyes unclouded by compulsion. Their cry becomes your own affirmation that you were born to soar free of narratives that constrict your wings, that the sky of your potential knows no brim. As you walk into this expanse, the embers of your inner fire kindle a path of radiance. You become a living myth, not because you enact grand exploits, but because you live in accordance with the sacred geometry of your own soul. Every boundary you honor, every no you speak, every act of self-honor becomes a chord in the symphony of your becoming, resonating outward to touch other souls who hunger for permission to claim their own sovereignty. Here in the gentle echo of dawn, you rest in the truth that you are whole. You are enough. You are sovereign. Empowered by boundaries, sanctified by self-love, you stand as the living answer to the ancient question, who am I? And the reply rises from your bones, clear and certain, I am mine.